For more than 2,000 years, one question has refused to disappear. People have argued about it in churches, universities, homes, battlefields, and quiet rooms late at night. Was Jesus simply a historical teacher? Was he a prophet? Was he the Messiah Christians believe him to be? Or is the entire question something human beings can never settle with evidence alone? Then someone asked a machine, not a priest, not a historian, not a philosopher, not a believer trying to defend his faith. A machine trained on an enormous amount of human knowledge was given one of the oldest questions imaginable. Who is Jesus? The surprising part was not that the system produced an answer. AI systems answer almost anything. The surprising part was the way the answer was built. Instead of simply choosing Christianity or atheism, the discussion moved through history, manuscripts, probability, prophecy, competing explanations, and the limits of what evidence can actually prove. And that created an uncomfortable situation for everyone. Some Christians thought the machine was finally taking their historical arguments seriously. Some skeptics saw the same answers and became suspicious of the way an AI can be influenced by its training data and by the wording of a question. And somewhere between those two reactions was a much bigger issue. Can a machine actually investigate a question about truth? Or can it only calculate what humans have already written about truth? That distinction changes everything. The AI at the center of this story is Grok, created by xAI, the artificial intelligence company founded by Elon Musk. Grok was built to interact with users in a more direct and less conventional way than many older chatbots. By 2025, the system had become far more capable, with newer models designed to reason across complicated subjects and respond to questions involving science, history, philosophy, religion, and current events. That matters because asking a chatbot for a definition of Jesus is easy. Asking it to examine the historical evidence for Jesus, separate historical claims from theological claims, compare competing explanations, and then explain what the evidence can and cannot establish is something completely different. And that is where this story becomes fascinating. Grok did not have a childhood. It did not grow up attending church every Sunday. It did not have parents teaching it that Christianity was true. It did not experience a crisis of faith. It did not become angry with religion after a personal tragedy. It did not have a favorite preacher or a favorite atheist writer. It had data. That does not make it perfectly neutral. In fact, as we will see, it creates a completely different problem. But it does mean that the machine approaches the question from a starting point that is unlike the starting point of most human beings. And the first thing the AI had to deal with was not the resurrection. It was something much simpler. Did Jesus actually exist? For this question, the answer from mainstream historical scholarship is remarkably consistent. The overwhelming majority of scholars who study the historical Jesus, including scholars who are not Christians, accept that Jesus of Nazareth was a real first-century Jewish figure. He taught in Roman-controlled Judea and was crucified during the administration of Pontius Pilate, generally placed somewhere around the early 1st century. There are references to Jesus in ancient sources outside the New Testament as well. The Roman historian Tacitus discusses the execution of Christus under Pontius Pilate. Josephus, the Jewish historian, also contains references to Jesus, although one passage has been debated by scholars because of possible later alterations. None of this proves that Jesus was divine, and that distinction is extremely important. Historical existence and theological identity are two different questions. You can establish that a person existed without establishing every claim made about that person. Grok's discussion followed the basic separation. Jesus as a historical figure is one question. Jesus as the Son of God is another. Jesus as the Messiah is another. The resurrection is another. And suddenly the conversation became much more difficult. Because the resurrection cannot be tested in a laboratory today. There is no modern experiment that can recreate first-century Jerusalem and place the resurrection on a scientific instrument. There is no DNA sample that can settle the question. There is no video recording. There is no physical measurement that can directly prove what happened inside a tomb nearly 2,000 years ago. So what can be examined? Historical evidence. That includes early Christian writings, the development of the early Christian movement, the claims made by the earliest followers of Jesus, the circumstances surrounding those claims, the rapid growth of Christianity, and the alternative explanations proposed by skeptics. This is where an AI can do something unusual. It can put enormous amounts of information side by side very quickly. But speed is not the same thing as certainty, and that became one of the central themes of the entire discussion. When users pushed the system to examine the resurrection, the AI did not simply say, "Science proves it," because science cannot prove a historical miracle in that way. Instead, the question became one of competing explanations. What explanation best fits the available historical claims? Was there a resurrection? Was the body moved? Did the followers experience visions? Did stories develop over time? Were the early accounts misunderstood? Or is there another explanation that fits the evidence better? These questions have been debated for generations. AI did not invent them. What changed was the speed and scale at which the arguments could be compared. And then the conversation moved into an area that caused even more controversy: probability. The idea was simple. If you break a complicated claim into smaller claims, you can attempt to estimate how likely each part is and then consider how they combine. But there is a major warning here. A probability number produced by an AI is not the same thing as a scientific measurement. The number depends on the assumptions used to create it. Change the assumptions, and the result can change dramatically. That is why some of the dramatic percentages associated with AI discussions about Christianity should be treated as outputs of a model, not as established scientific facts. Still, the numbers attracted attention because they created a strange contradiction. On one side, the machine could calculate that the complete theological claim of Christianity depends on many separate assumptions: the existence of God, the reliability of the biblical texts, the identity of Jesus, the meaning of sin and atonement, the possibility of miracles, the resurrection, and the existence of an afterlife. If you assign probabilities to all of those assumptions and multiply them together, the final number can become extremely small. That does not automatically mean Christianity is false. It means that a complex claim can become mathematically unlikely when you define it as a chain of many independent assumptions. But there was another side to the discussion. The historical case surrounding the resurrection contains a collection of facts that believers argue are difficult to explain together using only natural alternatives. The disciples believed Jesus had risen. Early Christians very quickly centered their movement on the resurrection. The movement expanded despite serious opposition. And some early followers suffered or died because they refused to abandon what they believed. That last point is often used as an argument for the sincerity of the early Christians. But again, sincerity is not the same as proof. People can die for beliefs that are false. The important historical question is different. Were the earliest followers knowingly inventing something they knew was false? There is no simple answer that closes the debate. What we can say is that their commitment was real. They genuinely believed the message they were spreading. And that makes the historical puzzle more interesting. Grok also encountered another major piece of the argument: the documentary evidence for the New Testament. The New Testament is supported by a large manuscript tradition compared with many other ancient works. Thousands of Greek manuscripts and many additional early translations and quotations allow scholars to compare different copies and study how the text was transmitted. One famous early fragment is P52, traditionally dated to the 2nd century and containing a small portion of the Gospel of John. The exact dating and interpretation of early manuscripts can be debated, but the larger point remains. There is a substantial textual tradition behind the New Testament that does not prove that every event described in it happened exactly as written. A large number of manuscripts tells us about the transmission of a text. It does not automatically prove the truth of the events described by that text. This is another place where the machine's answer becomes interesting. A serious historical method does not ask whether an ancient document contains any differences between copies. Ancient documents often contain differences. The question is whether those differences destroy the central claims. And this is where AI-generated discussions sometimes surprise people. If someone asks an AI to find contradictions in the Bible, it can produce a long list of apparent differences. Different gospel accounts may emphasize different details. Genealogies may be presented differently. Accounts of the resurrection contain variations in wording and sequence. But a difference is not automatically a contradiction. Two eyewitnesses can describe the same event using different details without making the entire event impossible. A historian therefore has to ask a harder question. Do the differences actually conflict, or do they simply reflect different perspectives? That is a very different way of reading an ancient document. And it was one reason some Christian viewers found the AI's analysis more serious than they expected. At the same time, skeptics noticed something else. The AI was not discovering new historical evidence. It was reorganizing existing evidence. That distinction matters enormously. An AI can read thousands of arguments about Jesus. It can compare Christian apologetics with skeptical scholarship. It can identify patterns across books and articles. It can summarize positions that would take a human years to study. But the machine is still dependent on the material it was trained on and the information available to it. It cannot travel back to first century Jerusalem. It cannot interview the disciples. It cannot stand beside the tomb. It cannot experience what Peter, Paul, Mary Magdalene, or any other historical person experienced. And this brings us to one of the most important questions in the entire story. What happens when the same AI gives different answers depending on how the question is asked? This is not a small technical detail. It goes to the heart of artificial intelligence. Suppose a user asks, which religion is most likely to be true? The AI may answer one way. Now change the wording. Compare Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and atheism, and tell me which worldview has the strongest evidence. The answer can change. Add different assumptions. Ask the system to prioritize historical evidence. then ask it to prioritize philosophical arguments, then ask it to assume that miracles are impossible, then ask it to allow miracles. You may receive very different conclusions. Why? Because the machine is responding to the structure of the problem, but that does not necessarily mean it is malfunctioning. It means the question itself contains assumptions. Humans do this too. A Christian may begin with the assumption that God exists and ask what the historical evidence says about Jesus. An atheist may begin with the assumption that supernatural explanations require extraordinary proof. A historian may try to suspend both assumptions and focus only on what can be established from surviving sources. Each starting point changes the path. AI can expose this problem because it can generate multiple versions of an argument almost instantly, and that leads to a powerful realization. Sometimes the machine is not telling us what the truth is. It is showing us how our question was constructed. The framing matters. The words matter. The assumptions matter. The evidence we choose to include matters, and the result can look dramatically different even when the subject is exactly the same. This is why AI should not be treated as an oracle. A fluent answer can sound authoritative even when the underlying reasoning is weak. A precise percentage can look scientific even when the assumptions behind it are subjective. A confident paragraph can hide uncertainty. And religion is one of the most dangerous places to forget that. Because people are not asking AI about Jesus only as an academic exercise. They are asking because they are searching. Some are believers looking for confirmation. Some are skeptics looking for a challenge to Christianity. Some are young people who have never had a serious conversation about religion with anyone. Some are people who have lost faith. Others are people who have just discovered it. And now an AI can become the first source they consult. That changes the scale of the issue. Imagine a teenager sitting alone at night with a phone, asking a machine, "Does God exist?" The machine responds in seconds. That teenager might never read a theology book. They might never take a philosophy class. They might never speak to a priest, pastor, scholar, parent, or mentor. The first serious framework they encounter could come from an AI. That is not simply a technology story. It is a cultural story. And it raises another problem: bias. No major AI system is created from pure neutrality. Its training material comes from human civilization. Human civilization contains disagreement. It contains religious texts, atheist arguments, academic papers, propaganda, personal stories, historical records, misinformation, journalism, philosophy, and millions of conflicting opinions. The system learns patterns from that material. Its developers also make decisions about how the model should behave. What should it refuse? What should it prioritize? How should it handle controversial subjects? What counts as reliable evidence? How should it respond when users ask about religion? Those choices matter. Researchers studying AI behavior have increasingly examined whether different models respond differently to religious questions, and whether their answers can shift depending on the wording of prompts. That research does not mean every viral claim about AI bias is automatically true, but the possibility is serious enough to deserve attention. If AI becomes a major source of information about religion, then the values and assumptions inside those systems can influence how millions of people understand belief. And that is why the debate around Grok and Jesus is much bigger than Grok. It is about the future of knowledge. It is about who controls the first answer. For centuries, religious knowledge was shaped by families, communities, religious institutions, books, teachers, and traditions. Then the internet changed that. Now AI is changing it again. Search engines gave people millions of documents. Social media gave everyone a platform. AI gives people something even more powerful, a conversational answer. You do not have to search 10 pages. You ask one question. The machine summarizes. It explains. It argues. It can challenge you. And sometimes it can even sound as if it has reached a conclusion on its own. But it has not lived a human life. It has no personal faith. It has no personal doubt. It has no spiritual experience. It has no fear of death. It has no memory of losing someone it loves. It has no sense of awe when looking at the night sky. It can describe those experiences because humans have written about them. But describing an experience is not the same as having one. And that difference becomes crucial when the question is Jesus. Because the historical question can be examined with documents. The philosophical question can be examined with arguments. The theological question can be discussed through scripture and tradition. But the personal question is different. What does Jesus mean to you? That cannot be calculated in the same way. This is also why the most dramatic claims about AI predicting future religious events deserve caution. There have been online discussions in which AI systems have been pushed to estimate the probability of prophetic events, including claims involving the return of Jesus and specific dates. Such outputs can become viral because a percentage sounds impressive. But a machine assigning 90%, 98%, or any other number to a religious prophecy does not make the event 98% likely in the scientific sense. The system is extrapolating from patterns and assumptions. It is not receiving information from the future. That difference is essential. A prediction says, this will happen. An extrapolation says, given these assumptions and these patterns, this outcome appears more likely. Those are not the same thing, and history has a long record of humans finding patterns that later turned out to be meaningless. That does not make prophecy meaningless. It simply means a numerical output from an AI should not be confused with divine revelation. The most interesting part is what happened after such predictions failed. When expected events did not occur, some people dismissed the AI immediately. Others argued that the model had never claimed to possess supernatural knowledge. And again, the deeper issue emerged. People were not really debating the machine. They were debating what they believed the machine was capable of knowing. That is a philosophical question. Can an AI discover truth? Or can it only estimate what is most defensible based on existing information? The answer may be closer to the second option. And if so, AI could still become incredibly useful. A historian could use it to compare sources. A student could use it to understand arguments on both sides. A believer could use it to find the strongest objections to their position. A skeptic could use it to examine the strongest arguments for Christianity instead of only the weakest versions. That would be a healthy use of the technology. The danger comes when people stop questioning the answer. If an AI says, this is true, the next question should be, why? What sources support that conclusion? What assumptions were used? What evidence would change the answer? What are the strongest arguments against it? Is the number a measured statistic or a model-generated estimate? Those questions protect us from turning AI into an artificial authority. And this brings us back to the original question. Who is Jesus? The machine can tell us what historians generally agree about his existence. It can explain the Roman and Jewish references. It can compare the gospel accounts. It can discuss manuscript evidence. It can summarize arguments for and against the resurrection. It can analyze philosophical arguments for God. It can calculate probabilities based on assumptions. It can even compare the major worldviews that have emerged around Jesus. But there is a boundary. At some point, the evidence ends and interpretation begins. And beyond interpretation lies faith. That does not mean faith is irrational. It means faith answers a different kind of question. A historical source can tell us that people claimed something happened. It cannot automatically tell us that the claim is true. A philosophical argument can make belief reasonable. It cannot force belief. A probability model can show what follows from certain assumptions. It cannot prove that the assumptions themselves are correct. And this is exactly where the machine reaches its limit. It can process the record. It cannot enter the past. It can compare testimonies. It cannot become one of the witnesses. It can describe the transformation of the early disciples. It cannot experience what caused that transformation. It can analyze Paul's dramatic change from persecutor of Christians to one of the most influential figures in early Christianity. It can compare psychological, historical, and theological explanations. But it cannot know from the inside what Paul experienced on the road to Damascus. That is the difference between information and experience. And perhaps that is the most important lesson hidden inside this entire story. We often assume that if a machine becomes powerful enough, it will eventually answer every question. But intelligence and knowledge are not identical. Knowledge and wisdom are not identical. Information and meaning are not identical. A machine can read millions of pages about love without loving anyone. It can read every theological argument ever written without worshiping. It can analyze grief without grieving. It can describe faith without believing. It can calculate probability without understanding what it feels like to stake an entire life on a belief. That does not make AI useless. It makes the role of AI clearer. It is a tool for investigation. It is not a replacement for human judgment. And when the subject is something as important as Jesus, that distinction becomes impossible to ignore. The controversy around Grok did not produce a final answer that ended 2,000 years of debate. Instead, it exposed something more interesting. Believers saw a machine taking historical arguments seriously. Skeptics saw a system capable of producing answers that could be shaped by assumptions and prompts. Researchers saw a new area of study, and ordinary people saw something that may be even more important. For the first time, millions of people can ask one of humanity's oldest questions and receive an instant, personalized conversation about it. That power is extraordinary, but it comes with responsibility. If you ask an AI about Jesus, do not only ask for the answer you want. Ask it for the strongest evidence against your position. Ask it what historians disagree about. Ask it which claims are well established and which are disputed. Ask it to separate fact from interpretation. Ask it where the evidence becomes uncertain, and then do something the machine cannot do for you. Think, read, question, talk to other human beings, and decide what you believe. Because the strangest part of this entire story is not that an AI talked about Jesus. It is that we are entering an age in which machines will increasingly become part of humanity's oldest conversations about God, morality, death, purpose, and meaning. The question is no longer simply, what did the AI say? The bigger question is, What happens when people start trusting the AI to decide what they believe? That is the part we should be watching, because the next generation may grow up with an AI available at every moment. When they are confused, they will ask it. When they are afraid, they may ask it. When they question religion, they may ask it. When they wonder whether God exists, they may ask it. And the answer they receive could shape their worldview before they ever encounter a human teacher who challenges it. That makes AI's role in religion a cultural issue of enormous importance. The machine does not need to become a god for people to treat it like one. It only needs to become the first place they go for answers. And perhaps that is the real warning hidden inside the story of Grok and Jesus. The machine did not prove Christianity. It did not disprove Christianity. It did not solve the resurrection. It did not close the question of God. What it did was expose the limits of certainty. It showed how much can be analyzed. It showed how many arguments can be compared. It showed how quickly evidence can be organized. But it also showed that the final question remains larger than the database. Who is Jesus? A historical figure can be studied. A religious figure can be worshipped. A philosophical subject can be debated. A person can believe he was the Messiah. Another person can reject that claim. An AI can summarize both sides, but none of those actions completely resolves the question. And maybe that is why the answer remains so powerful after 2,000 years. The machine can take the question apart. It can examine the documents. It can count the manuscripts. It can compare the arguments. It can estimate probabilities. It can identify patterns. And after all of that, it can still arrive at the same uncomfortable boundary. There's a point where evidence can take you only so far. Beyond that point comes interpretation, then conviction, then faith or doubt. And those are not things a machine can manufacture inside you. Perhaps the biggest surprise was never what the AI said about Jesus. Perhaps the real surprise was what the conversation revealed about us. We want certainty. We want a final number. We want a perfect argument. We want someone or something powerful enough to settle the question for us. But 2,000 years of history have not produced that answer. And now, even after giving the question to a machine capable of processing enormous amounts of human knowledge, the question is still standing. Who is Jesus? The AI can give you the evidence. It can give you the history. It can give you the arguments. It can give you the probabilities. But it cannot live the answer for you. And perhaps some questions were never meant to be solved by processing power alone. Perhaps some questions are meant to be examined carefully, argued honestly, and then lived. That may be the most important thing an AI can reveal about Jesus. Not that it has finally solved the mystery, but that even with access to an extraordinary amount of human knowledge, the mystery remains. And now, for the first time, the machine is standing at the same crossroads as everyone else, between history and faith, between evidence and interpretation, between what we can calculate and what we can never fully measure. And if that sounds like an ending, it is not. It is the beginning of a much bigger question. As artificial intelligence becomes more powerful, will we use it to help us think more deeply? Or will we eventually use it to think for us? Because when the machine gives us an answer about Jesus, the most important response may not be agreement or rejection. It may simply be one more question. How do you know? And that question, perhaps no more than any number or prediction, is where the real search begins.